So welcome everyone to today's ConnexUs Thursday talk. Today we're joined by Aluel Atem talking about feminist social enterprise within humanitarian contexts. I'm Xander Willoughby. As always, I'm really excited to be your host today. And I know I say this every time, but I've been really looking forward to this session for a few weeks now. So a bit of housekeeping. I think for those of you who have been to Thursday talks before, you know, but if you're new to these sessions, then welcome. After the presentation, we'll have time for discussion, reflection, question and answer, all of that. So throughout the presentation, if you have questions that you want to put out into the space early, there's a Q&A function. I always forget, I think it's over here on your dashboard. Feel free to put those in by text. Otherwise, you can raise your hand afterwards and we'll sort of go around and let people share their questions and reflections from there. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it there and hand it over to you. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we're excited to hear and to learn from you today, and looking forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thank you so much, Xander. Thank you for having me as well. My name is Aluel Atem. In summary, I am a feminist activist or feminist peace builder, and that's the background and work that the space I've been in for the longest time, probably over a decade now. And I particularly work in humanitarian and development contexts. I'm a South Sudanese, but I work globally and still rooted in my community work in South Sudan. So today I'm going to share just reflections, a journey of one of the spaces, a community that I'm part of in South Sudan called Mamarasaket Village. It's a social enterprise, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And I look forward to having a conversation with you all, listening to insights from some people who are probably on the call and doing similar work in different contexts. So I'm also here to hear insight from those that might also have additions to add. I will share screen, go through the presentation, and then we can open it up for a discussion after that. So I will start with the founding history or the reason why we started Mamarasaket village. So Mamarasaket is an Arabic, South Sudanese Arabic phrase that means not just a woman. And it is countering a phrase that tends to be used as a derogatory term that says marasakit, which means just a woman. And it's often used as a conversation, like if something happens and someone says marasakit to mean you're just a woman, it is meant to dehumanize you. It is meant to diminish you. It's used in a negative way to just shut things down. And so the name is derived from that place in resistance of that, to say not just a woman, in other words. And this institution or community is a feminist social enterprise that was founded in 2020. And there's a couple reasons behind it, but one of the main reasons, reflecting on my personal piece of things, is I had been in the development space, in the humanitarian or NGO space for the longest time. And one of the challenges that I struggle with is the aspect of heavily dependency on funding. For those that work in women's rights organizations, especially local women's rights work organizations, the funding is often very short term. So maybe at most, I think things are changing, the structures are changing a bit now, but maybe at most you're getting something for 6 months, you're getting something for 1 year, some even 3 months. And the work that we do on women's rights is work that is long term. It requires shifting norms, shifting attitudes. And so it's not something that can be accomplished in such short windows. And the other second piece to the story is also the fact that a lot of the time, the funding is not only is it short term, it's not consistent over time. And so maybe you will have one grant for a year and then that ends. And so keeping up with the same piece of work without being shifted between the funding priorities, because a different funder comes in, they want to focus on something entirely different. And so consistency for me was something I struggled with over time. And so one of the reasons we founded or started this and registered it intentionally as a social enterprise is to enable us to get to a place where we can generate resources that can enable us to continue the work, and whatever funding we receive helps us build on that work and or magnify or amplify that work in different ways, but not having to shut down when there's no funding available. And it wasn't an easy process because in South Sudan, maybe unlike other contexts, the concept of social entrepreneurship is new. It was new when we started and it's still pretty much new at this point. And I remember even registering was a problem because, they were like, are you an NGO? We're like, no. Are you a company? We're like, not really. And so it took us a while to be registered because they weren't sure, like, where do you fall? And I remember they ended up registering the space as a company limited by guarantors because that was the only option they could provide. And so it's still a new space, even for us. 5 years down the line, we're still, or almost 6 years now, and we're still navigating and trying to understand just what that means for us. And so the mission, or one of the things we really focus on or are trying to achieve with this, is we want to establish spaces that can enable conscious feminist raising, that can enable us to get to a place where we're building a feminist community and a critical mass of feminist conscious women and girls who are able to stand up for their rights. Because when you have a critical mass of conscious individuals on whatever social issue that is, it makes it easier when there are more voices than when there are fewer voices. And so we really want the space to be something that enables that. And the key aspect of this is to establish a multipurpose space that is self-sustaining. And the vision for that space is to establish a space that provides services, and services in two ways. So the idea for the actual village, and that's why the name has the village in it, is to create a space that has two sides to it. That one side is open to the public, to be able to generate income through a local restaurant and also through a multipurpose women's business space. So if you're looking for a spot in South Sudan where you want to access women-made products only, that can be one of the spaces you stop by, and you can find a variety of products that are made by different women, and you're able to buy for those that are particular about supporting women businesses, women initiatives, women effort. And then also a local restaurant attached to it that is meant to give people the local experience. If you're in South Sudan and you need to stop and experience the culture, experience the food in different ways, that space can be where you can stop. And then the other half of it is meant to just be a women space only. And so a conferencing space for conversations, and also like a self-care space, a spa space that women can access and use. Maybe I want to go on a date with my girlfriend, and that can be a space I can go and just exist and leave. And it's a women-only friendly space. And that space, obviously, the services are meant to generate income. And so despite being subsidized, that these services will be meant to generate income that we can then use to sustain our programming, the work that we do at Mama Rasatit Village. It's 5 years down the line, getting somewhere, but I will talk about that a bit later. But that's really the mission and the point why we want to create these self-sustainable spaces where we do a lot of critical feminist work, critical feminist thinking work, building community. And that's basically what the mission for that space, or the social enterprise product or aspect of it is. We use various approaches. One of them is multimedia. So we use a lot of digital stories, digital storytelling. We use a lot of content creation, because we also know that while we exist in the real world, there's also a lot that can be done through the digital spaces. So we use multimedia a lot in our work. We use a lot of creative expression and visual narratives. That includes poetry, it includes narrative photography, digital illustrations, different pieces of artistic expression, painting, to communicate our work as also a form of resistance in the journey that we're in as a community of women. We use culture. And so one of our main work is revolved around preserving cultural skills, especially around beadlery work, knowledge, and sharing information around specific positive cultural attitudes and cultural things that we also would like to preserve. And we do research. And so a lot of our programming is grounded in assessments that we do. There's nothing that we do without first understanding what it is, and also documenting. We really are intentional about documenting women's narratives and archiving them. We hope that it's not just for this generation, but it's work that can benefit generations to come. So we have three main programs at Mamara Circuit Village. One of them is called Gender Talk 211, which is a multimedia platform that provides platforms to amplify women's voices. We use creative art to document women, both past and present women's experiences and narratives, and contributing to building an archive of this content. So Gender Talk 211 is one of our really amazing program that has provided us opportunities. If you go on our Gender Talk website, there's a lot of articles, there's a lot of poetry, there's a lot of content and information that is by women, for women, and produced to educate the world on just a lot of the incredible things that are South Sudanese women. The second program that we mainly focus on is called the Suksukna program, and it's a bead making project that is meant to enhance but also preserve the artistic knowledge of beading. South Sudan has amazing and beautiful beadery work, and a lot of that is dying because the younger generation is not picking up on that. So the Suksukna project is also one of our resource income generating programs that enable us to generate resources from the beadery work that we make while also preserving the knowledge and skills and passing it down to other generations. And then the third main other program focus on is called Tamal Mara. So Suksukna is an Arabic word that means our beads, or South Sudanese Arabic word that means our beads, for those that might understand what it means. And then Tamal Mara also directly means women's community. And it is a program that focuses on building community. Our main people that we focus on are young women and women in the informal sector. And so this is one of the spaces and programs that is really focused on building community across these two groups that we focus on. So I will dive a little bit more on each of the programs just to give you a bit more insight on each of them. And so with our Gender Talk 211 program, we have a radio or like a podcast version of it. And previously we had done a lot of the conversations on radio, because radio is one of the multimedia tools or platforms that is easily accessible across South Sudan. But now we're transitioning, trying to balance both. And since we started the radio program, the Gender Talk 211 program, we've had so far 62 episodes. We've hosted 112 guests that are diverse, but mostly primarily women and girls. Some of this content, some of these conversations can be accessed on our YouTube page, but not everything is on YouTube. We want to do better with uploading and archiving and keeping some of these there, because we know that these are valuable resources, not just for now, but for the future. On our website as well, we've published 45 articles and poems, primarily written by South Sudanese women, young women and girls, exploring different issues, different topics, from healing to resistance to issues around violence, and just ways that we're envisioning the community or the country that we want. And then we also do a lot of curation. One of the things we do is there's a lot to be learned about the different. South Sudan is very diverse, and so we curate cultural attires. We have amazing, unique, and beautiful cultural attires, and most of these cultural attires have incredible stories behind them. You could see someone wearing a bead, but every color of that bead has a story to why. And someone will see a combination of beads, for example, and they have meanings and attachments to those. And we want to be able to tell and preserve this knowledge on our cultural attires. We also curate and document stories of resistance, because we also believe in hope. We believe in drawing inspirations to tell that it is possible a lot of the time for some of the things that we might think are possible to change. So we do document and also curate stories of resistance, individual and collective stories of resistance. And through Gender Talk 211, in 2022, we established the first feminist mini library in Juba, and that library continues to create lasting educational resources. We have a huge community of young women, and so they have access to come and borrow these books. They go read and then return them, and so they don't pay for it. It's just meant to enhance reading, to enhance individual work for those that like to read. And so Gender Talk 211 is just, in summary, some of the specific things that we do under that program. And then the Mutamal Mara program, which is a women's program, it's primarily focused on building community. And like I said, our constituency is young women and women in the informal sector. And we do that in two ways. So we build community through one of our flagship program called the Feminist Talking Circle, which is a 4 to 5 day space that is created for it's cohort base of young women. And we started this space in 2020. And so far has created space for 244 young women across South Sudan. For the last 2 years, we were mostly Juba focused, but this year we've been able to move out of Juba to different states out of South Sudan, and we'll continue to do that. And so the Feminist Talking Circle is one way that we build community. And once, the young women go through this process or this space, then they become a part of the community and continue to network and learn and also build community with other women over time. And then the second way we build community, especially with the women in the informal sector, and we have what we call the Women in the Informal Sector Forums that bring together different women that are. South Sudan is a very, I don't know what is the right English word for it, but it's still largely informally dominated. If you look at the spaces, the number of women that are providing for their families through the space that is largely considered the informal sector is huge. And these are the women that are literally carrying the country's economy on their backs through the works that they do to provide for their families. We have a large communal leadership structures, and we have women that are leading in some of these spaces. So our informal women in the informal sector forums are meant to create spaces for women in these various spaces, women that don't often find themselves in workshops that require a certain level of English or, literacy skills to be able to participate, that this gets to be a space where these women can commune, can come together and also strategize and have conversations and build network with each other. And so far that community has 84 women, and it is also a growing space. So these are like some of the two primary ways we build community at Mamarasakit Village. And then the Suksukna, or the bead making program, is also a space that has, enhanced the knowledge and skills of. We have 13 women bead makers that went through intensive training, and these are women that are coming from different cultural background, and so sharing the knowledge of the different beadery artistic work across different cultures. And so it's also a way of building peace, across the different communities amongst the women themselves. And this work has really enabled these women to also not only support their families, but to also support us in generating resources that we use to enhance our programming, because it's one of our income generating initiatives. And this program has really made traditional craft accessible to newer generations. These younger women that are being trained on these skills, but also making some of these beads that were almost dying more accessible to the generation, and admirable, if I could use that word. And so we have corsets that sometimes are expensive to buy, but can be rented. So people have been hiring them for their cultural events, for pregnancy photo shoots, for traditional marriages. You can just hire the beads and then use them and return them. Someone else hires them, making them more accessible than if someone has to make them from scratch. Because making one corset, for example, can take a month, just one corset. And so when people can have the time to order their specialized colors, that's fine. But if they don't, then there are corsets that they can just use and return at their convenience. And has also been very helpful in sustaining our work, because the resources from that are enabling us to sustain some of our activities or programs that we do. And it's really largely contributing to cultural preservation across generations and also across cultures in the women that within the space that we work with. Where are we headed, or how are we envisioning ourselves? We're diversifying our Suksukna program. And so just expanding our products beyond the beadery work, which are amazing. We're adding other souvenirs to it. We're adding water bottles, we're adding T-shirts, we're adding tote bags, we're adding a different. If you stop in South Sudan or in Juba and you're trying to get a souvenir to take back home, we want to make sure we can have a diverse range of products that people can buy and to go back with. And also that contributes to our self-resourcing. And then we are in the process of acquiring land, because the main goal is to bring the village piece of this initiative to life. And that is the main product. That is the main social entrepreneurial piece of it. The Suksukna project is one of it. It's just a small piece, and it's something we can afford and do right now. But the end goal is really to be able to establish the actual village itself, the multipurpose space that we want to establish. We're in the process of acquiring land now, which is a huge milestone, because getting land in Juba is a nightmare for those that might be familiar with South Sudan. We have a vast land, but it's the structure of it is still not very well done, but also the prices and just acquiring land in a strategic location can be a nightmare. So that took us forever, but we're in the process of finalizing that, and we believe that will be able to enable us to get going with the vision, building it piece by piece. It might take a few more years to bring the whole idea to life, but we are very optimistic in the journey of bringing that village to life, because we think it will be an incredible space for the things that we want to achieve, and especially in the aspect of sustaining ourselves. So yeah, that's just really briefly in very many words what Mamarasakit Village Space is for and why we started the space as a social enterprise and the reasons behind that. The last piece I wanted to add to that is the aspect of the context that we operate in. And so for South Sudan, we have been a humanitarian context before our founding, and it's over a decade later, and we're still a humanitarian context. And so sometimes coming to terms with that reality is not an easy thing. And so that's why I'm talking about it as a feminist humanitarian, a feminist social enterprise in a humanitarian context, because we live in a context where resourcing or funding of such initiatives is limited to things that are meant to be temporary. But what does that mean for a context where that temporary is your everyday reality and there's no chance that that context is going to change anytime? Like, what does it mean to support in ways that leave communities rooted and self-sustainable just beyond the funding? So yeah, I've taken way more time than I thought I would. So I will pass it to Zanza now.
No, I was honestly hoping you'd keep talking for another 20 minutes because it's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. I think one reflection that I had while you were talking is that, like, so often we hear about, especially in the peace building field, like a project that focuses on sort of one very small thing or like another small thing and that works really important. Then you see other ones that do sort of, okay, we're going to grab onto sort of everything we can get a hold of. And it feels like you have found a way to cover a lot of aspects of life and a lot of really important projects that fit together. I shouldn't use the word projects, but I think you know what I mean there. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. And as a reminder to the audience, there's a couple ways that you can ask questions, or if you have reflections, maybe you work on things that are similar and you want to share something from your context. I have a question in the chat. I'll go ahead and read it. It's a question on the Gender Talks 211 work of asking about how big are issues in getting access to media or radio, because that's something that's fairly easy to do with sort of the traditional or mainstream media sources, or is it mainly sort of through social media and podcast work? And then the follow-up question is sort of how do you address those of sort of trying to get the voices and the stories out there?
So between 2020 and 2022, we heavily use radio because radio is still one of the easily accessible, especially outside of Juba, tools. And so we still use radio, but one of the other ways just across besides radio as one way is these spaces of convening are also spaces where we share a lot of these resources. So we pull resources from conversations that have happened and plug them into our community spaces through the Moitamal Mara program for more accessibility. But like the reason we're using the website is really mostly for archival purposes, that we want to document this for the broader world. Because if one of the challenges is also a lot of our narratives as South Sudanese women are often told by others. It's either by development organizations, humanitarian organizations. And what that does is a lot of the stories are told from a victimhood point of view. Like we don't have agency. And so it's really countering also that. And the reason we use some of those spaces, even though they're not 100% accessible to majority of South Sudanese, is also challenging the global narrative that we can tell our own stories, we can archive our own experiences, and we can platform ourselves. So that is one of the reasons we balance the two, also to just, take control of our narrative in some of these digital spaces that where we're not fairly represented a lot of the time. But yeah, we use radio a lot for the in country, and also using those resources for the in-person convening for more broader conversations. I don't know if that answers. I hope that answers the question.
On my side, it did. I really appreciate the sort of the way that you all are going about that, because we see so many of that, of somebody telling somebody else's story and through their own lens and all of that. For those of you in the audience, I put the link to the website in the chat. Please look through. I've been reading through the last few days. Let me go to the next question. This is also one for me to read out. The question is asking if maybe you can touch a bit more of sort of the interplay between doing sustainable development and then responding to humanitarian challenges at the same time, and sort of where you see those as maybe complementary, or where you have to shift your focus sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like for me, for conflicts that countries like South Sudan, that it's going to take a while for us to fully transition out of the humanitarian context setting, for example. And one of the reasons I feel like also that largely contributes to that temporary state is a lot of the community support work is not deeply grounded with that in mind, to say, how are we showing up in ways that once we leave, that these communities are not left devastated and don't even know now where to begin from. And it's something I've struggled with for the longest time, because, there are crises that hit, and there are times when the response has to be immediate and emergency, and it's like putting off fires. But then also beyond that, it has to be rooted in sustainable models and ways and support. And I think for me, it can be through skills, it can be through resourcing that sees beyond the moment, that leaves communities still self-reliant. There's also like a lot of ways that people have coped for the longest time, and how can some of these support build on those existing community support systems and structures, instead of often creating new ways of supporting the community that then takes them away from how they used to cope, to trying to show them these other ways. And then once you leave, you're forming new groups, for example, new women's groups, when you could be building on the existing community groups and structures. And so that can exist beyond your presence. So I think there are ways that I feel like, it can go both ways, that there are times when the response is now, but it has to come with a thinking of, okay, so beyond, if you put up this fire, and then what? I feel like a lot of the humanitarian response work is not thinking beyond, for example, that after you've put out the fire, and then what? And I feel like that's a space that we can challenge ourselves to think more from, instead of the reactionary way, like how can we intend? And it will look different across different contexts, across different groups. But I think designing some of these in conversation with the communities affected is where the answers lie. And I think it's something I would want to push us to continue to do more.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. We have a question from Alex.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Aluel, first of all, Aluel, if I could say, I so enjoyed listening to your explanation of what you're doing. That really was inspiring. In a time where there's a lot of lack of hope, I suppose, I just feel you reminded me there is so much hope still out there, and commitment to really putting something positive together. Thank you so much. My question is more about the slight, I think, nuance that I wanted to hear a bit more about, which is that as a feminist practitioner, I can hear that you are working to strengthen the voice and agency of women by joining them together and allowing the people, particularly young women or women, to realize their potential. But I wonder, could you say a bit more about whether or how you are tackling the actual social norms? You mentioned Mara Sakit, for example, the social norms in society at large. So how are you engaging with, let's say, decision makers or men, let's say, or entrepreneurs in the wider sense in Juba or wider, to shift those social norms? What is your take on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's so beyond ourselves, we are also plugged in other spaces, pushing for laws that such as the anti-gender based violence bill, family laws. There's a lot of legal aspect that is meant to tackle some of these issues. But beyond the space, so one of the reasons we create women's spaces is we feel like there's a lot that happens with how we internalize patriarchal norms or gendered norms as women, as girls. And we feel like if we start from a place of having those conversations for younger women, for girls to actually start to see how some of these systems operate and what does that mean for them, we feel like it's a really good place of starting with agency for women in the informal sector. Because there's a lot of, like, South Sudanese women have historically resisted. But a lot of the time when feminist or women's rights work is presented, and that's one of the backlashes that we get, is people say, oh, it's a Western concept. And I'm like, you're not going to take away our labor, our women, the women that came before us, they did a lot of work for, even for me to go to school. So many women sacrificed for that. These were women that never went to school, but knew that their daughters needed to go to school. And so there's a lot of the time when that work is taken away and credit given to the West. Oh, these are Western ideas. And I'm like, no. And if you look through our cultures, there's a lot of songs. Women use a lot of, they use spoken words to express their grievances, to express, to resist, to refuse things, to refuse to conform. And so there's a lot that needs to be pulled from that learning to ground our feminist work, because it is in that grounding of the work that we will shift these norms, that people will see that actually what we think is our culture a lot of the time are colonial legacies, of patriarchal colonial legacies. And so we invest a lot in conversations with women because we believe if we can develop a critical mass, that is a good place to start, because then that shifts. If more women are pushing their girls to go to school, more women are resisting around child marriage. And so I feel like we have a lot of agency to drive the change that we want to see before we can even ask what that means for men. And also thinking around legal frameworks, because we are still governed a lot by customary laws that don't favor women a lot of the time. And so what does that mean to also think about legal frameworks that are moving beyond this many customary courts and laws that dictate what is suitable for what and when? So that is some of the ways we're tackling it. And the goal is that to say that if we can build that critical mass, through a critical mass, there's a lot that can be changed there, with recognition that norms take time and that can only be done over time. So it's a journey. It's a journey that we hope to get there, but it will definitely take time. But we are seeing change. It's very slow, but we're hopeful that slowly we'll get there.
Thank you so much. That's so inspiring. Thank you. I agree with you.
Thank you both. Aisha is asking about partnerships with other parts of society, with civil society, with government, sort of how you approach working with others.
Yes, so we are part of the larger women's space, like NGO spaces. And I think one of the things we're trying to challenge, to not default to the NGO's way of resistance, because a lot of the time that tends to make the space inaccessible to a lot of the constituency that we focus on. So we are part of several women's coalitions, women's networks. So we are plugged into those spaces in terms of organizations that focus on women's rights. We also have a number of allyship partnerships and coalitions that we work with, especially around institutions that are focused on technology-related rights. There's a lot there that enable us to partner with some of these civil society institutions, because one of the things that is also a growing threat at the moment is technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So we are also identifying strategic allyships and partners that are enabling us to enhance the work that we do in different ways. So we do have partnerships, we do collaborate across different human rights and civil society institutions, and also with government institutions. Now our season for Gender Talk 211 this year is called Women in Power. And we're documenting stories and experiences of women in leadership, especially different political leadership, whether at the communal level in different spaces. And we're partnering with, for example, the South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation, that is one of the prominent national TV and radio station, because they have a huge audience. And so we're also using that platform. So we do leverage partnerships and collaborations with civil society, with government institutions as needed. But yeah, I think there's a lot that needs to be done, especially with the government side, because one of the challenges is the work on women's rights in South Sudan is hugely foreign funded, and that disconnects the government from their responsibility of resourcing the work. And so we will have international laws that are adopted, but then are not domesticated because they are not allocating resources. And so how do we also push our own government to say it's not just enough to sign these agreements or documents or policies? You actually have to put the money, where you're signing these things, because the work needs resourcing. So there is absolutely a lot to be done in how we collaborate with our government and also hold it accountable to resource gender and women's rights work in South Sudan.
Yeah.
That's an area of growth for sure. Yeah.
The next question, you may have unknowingly made a segue to it, but somebody was asking about things that you're really hopeful for / looking forward to in sort of the near-term future with your work.
I'm very optimistic. I think we have an amazing community. Someone talked about hope earlier, and I think it is a space that gives me hope every day. When I see different women, different, young women that are part of our community and the different ways they're challenging and creating spaces for other women as well, I think for me, the ripple effect is where a lot of my hope lies, because, it's not work that can be done by a few people. It requires a collective approach. I'm also really optimistic about just the way we're thinking about a lot of things as women. I think there's a lot of learning that we're drawing from the region, globally, from women that have moved a few more steps beyond us. And so there's a lot that we can draw from those women, both the good and the negative, that can enable us to strategically move better as a space, because we are still very far on the journey of women's rights. As a collective, we're seeing representation is becoming more achievable in one way or the other, but we're not seeing the meaningful participation aspect of it. And so I think beyond just the representation, so someone will say, oh, but your country already has like a vice president who's a female, or certain key ministerial positions, but that this conversation usually never goes beyond how some of these structures are reproducing oppressive systems that don't necessarily uplift every single woman, but rather, create a class of its own. So I think there's a lot that we can draw from there that gives me a lot of hope in how we move forward. And yeah, I think I'm hopeful that if we realize our village idea, we still have a long way to go. But I think in terms of like very personalized hope, that I think there's a lot that space can offer, that is not just in terms of the space for the community we're building it for, but also in terms of our own sustainability in the work, because we know this work is generational work. It's not something that we're doing and 10 years from now it's done. There's a lot that still has to happen, and I'm hopeful that by moving towards models that enable us to be self-sustainable and not entirely depend on funding, I think that gives me a lot of hope in feeling in charge of the change we want to see.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I'm looking through the list of participants, and we have people in the Sahel, people in Southeast Asia, people in Europe, people sort of across. And I'm wondering, what is something that you and your team have sort of learned or figured out or done that you really hope that people in other regions and contexts can learn from you all and integrate into their own efforts?
No, I think there's several that I can think of, but the one that stands out for me is just how interconnected we are. And I think this is being in women's spaces beyond just South Sudan, whether it be the region, be it the continent, be it globally. It's just fascinating every time to just see how interconnected our struggles are, especially as women, and how good systems of oppression are at adapting. That you say this, and they're like, okay, you want women to be represented in these spaces? Great, we'll pick and place, but then they will not have any influence. And now you have to say, no, that was not what we meant. We meant they actually are in that space and influencing things and advancing. And so I think one of the things that, I think for me, just how good these systems are at adapting and co-opting and staying ahead of the game, that if we're not consistently alert, that we just find ourselves moving in circles. And I've seen this not just in South Sudan, but also even what is happening globally right now. We're seeing a lot of the work that had previously been achieved being undone right before our eyes. And it's happening so fast. I think the other second thing that I think we've learned is, and I think this is also systemic and structural, that we are meant to be kept in this reactionary mode to things, that we barely get to strategize and respond, and because you're constantly placed in a position where you're fighting for the now, that it just makes it so hard to just to pause. When do you pause? We're constantly running and running and running because so many things are getting thrown at us from all angles. And it can be so exhausting. I've had moments where I think we've collectively felt like burnt out, frustrated, hopeless, because it just seems like you're just reacting to things with limited space. So maybe, how to divide our energy so they can be focused on what needs to be reacted to, but also thinking about more ways that we can respond strategically in ways that enable us to not find ourselves back in the place where we started yesterday. And it's not an easy thing because a lot of these things are intentional. They are well thought through. They're well resourced, that are meant to disable the undo the work. So I think for me, those two have been very critical lessons. And to say it's okay to be tired. It's okay to feel burnt out. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to say I'm not showing up today, and that should be okay. Because the work we're doing is not a destination. I don't think there will be a day where we will arrive and say, okay, this is what we dreamed and now we're here. I think the world keeps changing, and it's about how do we keep transforming things in ways that continue to work with us in the context that are changing. Because what felt like a priority 20 years ago might not be a priority right now, but something else has evolved, has developed, that needs to be addressed. So I think learning to see it, especially when I'm not feeling a lot of progress, to remind myself that it's okay. It's okay that things are not working out, but that doesn't mean that they won't work out eventually. And this work has no destination for me. I think it's about transformative approaches that will look different in different contexts, but the work will still have to be done. Whether it's peace building work, conflicts are our everyday part of life. These are things we cannot prevent, or we cannot say they're basically inevitable. And so what does that mean? What different tools, as new things arise, how do we keep developing things that are helping us to get there? So I think for me, those have been very critical learnings for me, especially this year when a lot of globally the world is feeling a bit too dark and too hopeless, especially around rights like women's rights, sexual minorities, different oppressed groups. There's just a lot that feels like doom. And just being able to remind myself that we will emerge stronger on the other side, I think, has been a nice fuel. Probably dark fuel, but for now, hopefully we'll get to the clean part of it that is driven from a place of positivity and a lot of hope. But in many words, that.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I found that personally really helpful framing and reminders as well, and lessons there. Before I let you go, is there anything that you wish somebody had asked, or one more thing on your mind? I'm getting a lot of comments in the chat of how much people have appreciated hearing from you today. So we'll get the thank yous for that now. But if there's any last thoughts, now's your time to share.
Yeah, I think especially given this is a space that has different actors, especially in the development of humanitarian settings or contexts, I think there's a lot of reflection to be done on how people engage women as a group, and especially when it comes to fighting our rights. I think there's a lot of good intentions, but the process and the approach doesn't always come off very helpful in very helpful ways. And so, I think continuing to center people whose liberations are being contributed to, showing up in spaces from a place of humility, from a place of care, and trusting that the people know what they're doing, that the people know where they want to go, that they are the vision bearers, and sometimes what they need is support. So, I think a lot of the time, you feel like you are a subject. I don't know if that's the my English is disappearing, but like, you're seen as something that needs to be, that something has to be done to, rather than the other way around. So I think there's a lot that needs to still be done in the development space, especially as we're experiencing this funding crisis globally, and knowing some of the work that is heavily impacted is human rights work, is women's rights work. And so there's a lot of lessons from the past that I think need to be intentionally reflected on to shape how we're moving forward in ways that are not leaving communities shattered, but are rooted in sustaining and leaving people dignified, that the work prioritizes dignity and community-based ways that are rooted in sustainability. I'm very big on sustainability. I've used that one a million times, because it felt like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it felt like, oh, it could never happen. And then now we're here. And I'm like, this is why we say, let's think beyond just the projects. Let's do work. And so there's a lot there to be unpacked. But I think this year, there's so much. This year, last year, there's a lot that, with the funding crisis, that I'm hoping people in the development space are reflecting upon and planning to show up in different ways that are more holistic than we have done in the past. I work globally, so I get to push things where I can with my small power, but I think it requires more voices that are thinking differently in how we're supporting in solidarity or resourcing work in the global south or at large.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's something we really needed to hear. Yeah, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and for sharing. There are a few people in the chat asking about getting in contact, so I'll make sure people get connected. Everyone feel free to email me if you want to. Is the best place for people to go sort of to the website and from there? Or how do you want people to follow up? Perfect.
To the website, but also by email. You can share. But website is fine as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody in the audience for joining us today. This was a really good session and a lot to reflect on the walk home too. So thank you for that as well. But thank you again, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sunny. Thank you, everyone.